Hi motorcycle fans, I'm about to show you how to put a Power Commander 5 Dynajet tuning for your Victory Vegas 2009. I bought pipes and realized that the best way to control the air mix blend was to buy this kit. The Power Commander is set up for fuel injection. They claim it's easy to install. We'll see. It should increase your throttle response and improve the mapping for the air-fuel mix. Comes with some pretty nice packaging. Not that that probably really matters, but it does help sell it. But one thing I'm pretty surprised with is the amount of connectors you have to figure out. Some bikes, they have different control on our fuel. They don't have this many connections, but on this Victory Vegas, they do a good job with the engine, and of course the side effect is that there's more complicated in their ignition system. The next thing you got to do is put your stickers that come in a package on the side of your toolkit. Of course, that always makes it better and you look more authentic, right? The first thing you have to do is take off the side panels to access the bolts for the seat. Once the bolts are removed, you can pull the seat straight off. You'll need a 6mm to take the bolts off the frame for the seat, and then you'll need an 8mm to unscrew the front or the rear bolt on the tank. Then you'll need also an 8mm on the front of the tank for the frame if you're going to fully remove it. It's always a good habit to put all the parts in an organized fashion so you remember how they go back on. If you have extra parts, which generally happens a lot of the time, you have to go back and redo something, look for where the missing bolt is. It's always good to also buy a set of hex Allen wrenches in metric for your bike that have a socket adaptation so that you can quickly remove the parts. You can also access the bottom of the fuel line if you pull the cover off on the right side. There's two options you have on the tank itself. My tank is fairly full, which is really kind of a mistake. I was driving around with it almost empty all the time, planning to put this on, but I kept having to use the bike because I had a dead battery in the Indian. And so now that I have time to do it, I've got to fill it. I filled it up, and what I've done is to, instead of lifting all that weight off, I've propped up the tank with a little bit of roll of tape to access the wiring into the ignition area. Now you'll start to route the cabling through the frame. Make sure it comes up and over the engine block so that the head doesn't cook the wire. And then you're going to take out these 4 bolts on the ignition to the coil. That frame will allow you to access the plugs in the rear. Really need a tripod. Maybe that's what I need to hold this camera, because I need 2 hands. So I've got the 4th bolt out, and now the assembly for the ignition coil and the connector is more accessible. Next, you need to unplug the stock wiring harness for the ignition coil. Lift this clip here and it should come straight off. I ended up taking off the gas tank because it was hard to get to the middle connectors. And then I found another problem where you see it cracked. Looks like a vacuum tube, so it'll replace that. After you've removed the 4 bolts for the ignition coil bracket, you'll want to connect the inserted wiring harness that is orange to the coil.
I don't know where it is right now. I don't want to get too...
locate the throttle position sensor and disconnect after pushing it on the latch. Then you can connect the splice for that circuit. This is what it should look like when you're done. Now you can start to put this side back together. Locate the rear ejector connector and substitute the harness there. The front one is very difficult to address. It's way in the middle, below the intake, and you can see that you need some really long tools to get in to access that. This probably took me half an hour or more to get to with some new tools. I recommend long screwdrivers and maybe hemostats that you can get in there to a deep connector and locate that. Locate the crank position sensor. It's in front of the rear shock, and splice the final connector into that location. Well, I got my part finally for the fuel pump. I'm going to reinstall this brand new part, $300 later off of eBay, into the fuel tank, and hopefully we're going to reassemble everything. I put some tape on the area where we gasket the tank just to make sure it stayed clean until the shipping came on the new part. So I can take that off now, and probably isn't a bad idea for me to also clean the surface to make sure no contaminants get inside the tank. Just make it so it can pick it up. Of course, you want a really good surface to attach, so you have a good seal. You certainly don't want gasoline leaking between your legs on a hot engine. That'd be a pretty bad scenario. I used to say there are two things that are really critical for motorcycles: good tires and good brakes. But probably the third thing is not to have a fuel leak. Okay, when I compare the old filter to the new one, quite a bit of difference. It's not terrible, but clearly you can see that it's got some use. I don't know how long you can go on these before you decide you have to replace the filter. This bike's got 20,000 miles on it, so you know, I'm doing pretty good, I think. And the idea is that the filter is going to sit down in this area of the bike. That's the lowest point for the gasoline, and it's the first thing you're going to stick back in when you slide this in. When I took the other one out, it was a bit of a challenge because you got to kind of corkscrew this in here. We'll see if this one's any different. Looks like it's still tight. Not sure what the best scenario is here. to kind of lift it at an angle last time to get to come out, so same problem going in. Gotta wiggle it back and forth. You also want to make sure that you protect the top of the tank, which is right now on the bottom, from any scratches. So I've got this laying on some bubble wrap. You could use a blanket or whatever. Mother is tight. Using the soft part of a tool seemed to help. One side's coming down now. About there. Looks like it kind of has to go down at an angle. There we go. That is tight. Seems to me they could have designed it a little bit bigger, it would have helped. Okay. Put all your screws back in. Oh, one other thing. Got to make sure the gasket's on here. Didn't come with one. This is the actual seal that occurs. So slide that over it. Should have put it on first. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. There's a groove it fits in. Make sure your gasket's on there good. Put a little bit of lubrication on the gasket. That'll make sure it gets a better seal. Wiggle it back and forth to help to get that one tube down in there. Okay, gasket's still okay. I think we're ready to roll.
Yay!
Feeling like it's right. Start your threads by hand so you don't strip them out. Once you get a couple on there, it starts to line up correctly. Before you get too far, once you get it all on and tight, you want to check to make sure it's not leaking. We don't want any leaks. No one ever does. And also make sure you don't have any extra screws. That's a problem. And do alternating torque on the screws so that it's even all the way around. It's pretty important. And it should feel like it's seating the seal, correctly. If it's kind of a soft clamp, then you've got a good chance that you've got that seal on correctly. If it feels loose or goes down deeper on one side, then you've got a problem. I don't know what the torque setting is on these, but being that you've got rubber, you can torque them pretty tight. Maybe 40-50 pounds. And when you reinstall the tank, don't forget to put in your overflow valve and your vacuum valve, the tube, so it's dripping all the way to the ground instead of the chassis. I'll try and put this back on again this time. Make sure we don't break the nozzle. Okay, unfortunately it's a week later and we're back with a new part that is a replacement for the new fuel pump. As you can see on these two, the connector is larger, and obviously Victory's had issues with that part that I broke on the nozzle for the fuel pump. And so now I have a replacement, and I am ready to put everything back together. Hopefully it'll all go back together and work. We'll see. So I got it all ready to go again, we hope. One thing you want to check before you have an issue is that all your wiring is locked down nicely, that you have all the areas of the wiring not hitting things that are going to vibrate and short. So I've used a lot of nylon tie straps for things that I've wired onto this chassis, and you'll find that that's going to make it more reliable. You'll then set the tank back down where it originally was, hopefully not breaking the nozzle again. Set the tank back down after you've inspected everything in the right place. Don't forget to connect your fuel pump electrical so that you have fuel pumping. And then of course, then connect your fuel pump back up. Pretty tight in there, so take your time. All right, looking good. So now all you have to do, and I say all you've got to do as a joke because usually that means you've forgotten some things and it's not as simple as it looks, but you have to just put all the parts back on. Hopefully you don't have any extra spare parts, and start it up and see if you've got everything connected properly. You also want to put a little Loctite or some type of locking device on the screws so they don't vibrate off. Well, the moment of truth. Let's see if it'll start. Probably going to need to get some fuel to it. Heard the fuel pump turn on, that's a good sign. You have to prime it probably a few times. Looks like we're back in business. Okay, finish putting it back together then, I guess. Woohoo! Finish putting all the covers on. Make sure you get the left and the right on correctly. And make sure it's secure, or it'll blow off in the wind. It's working. So lessons for the day. Make sure you don't break your fuel nozzle on your fuel pump. Make sure you got all the connections properly wired in. Have some long tools to make sure that they're properly wired in. Third item, don't break the fuel nozzle and think that the same part will work when you put a replacement fuel line in. You got to go up to 11.8 millimeter connector on that plastic connector to the tank. That's a redesign that Victory did probably from everyone's issues that they've had when they've run other wiring through the frames or painted parts or what have you. So clearly it's been a design flaw that they have corrected, but it's going to be about a $460 mistake. Lessons learned, right? Ride safe, keep the rubber on the road. See you later.